Welcome to Y Days 2020. Tonight we're going to begin with a local heroes strand, which kicks off the whole convention, which starts proper tomorrow morning with our networking events, the afternoon of panels, evening of showcases, and that'll be repeated on Friday with a whole host of different activities on the Saturday, including my guided tour, a whiskey tasting, and a festival takeover by Focus Wales and the Edinburgh Jazz and Blues Festival. Tonight, we're kicking off with a very special interview with Lisa Whytock, whose Active Events celebrates 30 years in the business this year. Lisa has worked with pretty much every promoter in Scotland, organised what was effectively the first successful festival, other than one in the late 70s, and is a force of nature. So we thought she was the ideal person to begin Y Days this year. And I'd like to welcome into the room Lisa Whytock. Hi, Lisa. How you doing?
Hi, Olaf. I'm great. How are you?
Very well, and all the better for seeing you. I've been looking forward to doing this interview for a very long time. And originally you were meant to come to Edinburgh in April and take part in our physical event. Then we realized we couldn't do a physical event, so now we're doing it remotely. But I think we've even managed to sort of meld our backdrop so it looks like I'm just in another part of your attic. So I think this is a good sign. For the viewers, it's worth mentioning that Lisa will be taking part in a Q&A at the end of this, or following this. We'll put details on the screen, and yes, you're welcome to join us. Lisa, you have an incredible career in the music industry, and we're going to talk through that. But I think what would be really good to start is get an idea of what your first record was and what was your first gig.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's really nice to be called a local hero, right? So thank you for that. The first album was actually the Beatles, because my mum and dad had a whole collection of Beatles albums, and so the very first album that I listened to was the Beatles. I can't remember which one. There were so many of them, but they were all great. And then my very first gig was AC/DC. I hitchhiked down to Donington Rock Festival at Monsters of Rock. Got there, had a whitey, saw the end of AC/DC, and then left, and that was it.
I think that, that's quite a claim to fame, having a first gig AC/DC and having a whitey at the same time. Did you actually catch any of it at the end, or did you see anything? Do you remember anything else after that?
I literally caught, I'm not kidding, I caught the very last number. That was it. I just fell asleep as soon as I got there and woke up for the very last number. It was great.
And did you see any other bands that year?
Not at that gig anyway.
And what got you into music then? I mean, were you from a musical family? Did you play an instrument, or was it another path that took you into the music business?
Yeah, I mean, it was student politics. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, I played the guitar very badly at school, but it was basically student politics. I was a member of the National Union of Students, and I was at Napier College, and this was all during the miners' strike, and around the time of the poll tax. So
what was that like? The miners' strike was what, 1984 in the
So, but the miners' strike, then followed by the poll tax, it was a very politicised time. And I basically started organising anti-apartheid concerts in Wilkie House in Edinburgh. That was the very first shows that I organised. And it, very quickly, Margaret Thatcher kind of decided that the poll tax was going to be introduced into Scotland on the 1st of April Fool's Day, 1989. And I really felt that we needed to do something about that. So it was a really student politics that got me involved in the music industry. That merging of culture with protest, like popular culture being used to express, the will of people and how people felt. That's what it was.
So for the foreign viewers and the younger viewers, the poll tax was the idea that everyone would pay the same amount of money for their local taxes, regardless of what their income was. And Scotland was essentially a guinea pig for this, and it led to a lot of resistance. It's quite a seminal period in Scotland's history, and one that I'm old enough to remember as well. So it's if you don't know about it, look it up, because it did lead to a lot of things in the future. So including Lisa's career in music. So your Napier College these days, it's actually a Napier University, and that's in Edinburgh. What was it you were studying there?
Communication studies. Started off studying communication studies.
And had you done anything before that, or did you go straight to Napier to be in your studies?
I decided originally I wanted to be a journalist. That didn't work out very well. And so I went to Stevenson College to get shorthand and typing, because you didn't do that at school in my days. So I spent a year there, got thrown out because we were too busy occupying the college and doing all sorts of demonstrations and stuff that we did. And then I went to Napier straight after that. So it was communication studies, but ironically, the throwing out of college was a bit of a theme with me, because I got thrown out of Napier College as well, off that course. And actually, that's quite an interesting story, because if you stood as a sabbatical, which I was standing for, I was standing for election for the student union, you were innocent until proven guilty. So I was out on appeal. And during my appeal, I managed to run for a sabbatical position at Napier College and won that. And then they let me back in. And to be honest, I passed the course anyway, because I was busy doing stuff that the course was teaching, like editing the magazine and all that kind of stuff at college anyway, at the student union.
And did you, how did you stand up? Did you get, I presumably you got elected, well, you did get elected, obviously, but I mean, what kind of campaign did you stand on? Were there any particular issues that you highlighted, or were there anything you did in your campaign?
I was very active in the Labour Party as a student. So I stood on a Labour Party ticket, got selected by the local student Labour Party to do that. And it was all about, rights, welfare, making sure that there were free grants. I mean, that was the time where there weren't any student loans. So we were still fighting quite hard for the student grants. So yeah, like all sorts of different issues, really. I think you've probably got a leaflet somewhere.
Yeah, I thought there was a leaflet somewhere as well. Maybe that'll be conjured up in due course. But I think it's interesting, because that has been, there's usually the student unions are a route into the music business in Scotland, but it's usually the entertainment officer rather than the welfare officer that does it. But for some reason, our leaflet has vanished, but we'll maybe retrieve it in due course. But we shrunk. So anyway, you became the sabbatical. You learned, I guess, a lot on that job. And is it true you actually managed to get your degree in the end, even though they had originally tried to kick you out?
Yeah. Yeah, but as I say, communication studies, it's like, it was a lot of about communication. And quite frankly, you know, I was leading student demonstrations with like big loud halos in my hand, marching all across Edinburgh. I was editing the student magazine. We were writing press releases, doing all of that stuff anyway, like in practice. So even though I missed a term, I went back in and sat the exams and passed. Not really.
And how did it work with your live promoting, your gig promoting, and what was the first show you actually put on?
It was an anti-apartheid concert in Wilkie House while I was a student. I was also chair of the Anti-Apartheid Society, and we organised a brilliant gig. I can't actually remember the complete lineup, but I think it was Swamp Trash, the Cataran, a whole bunch of bands in Edinburgh at that time. And Edinburgh is quite a small place. I mean, or it certainly was then. The city centre was quite small, you know, like a lot of us drank in the same bars, like the bands were in the same bars. We were all, you know, quite politically active. We all kind of knew each other. So that was the first gig and it sold out. So so that was a good start, really. I was pretty young then. I mean, I must have been about, I don't know, 18 or something when I first did that.
And I mean, it's worth mentioning as well, that was a really vibrant time in Edinburgh's music scene. There were a lot of the touring bands played Edinburgh rather than Glasgow. It was, the main independent distribution company, the offshoot of Rough Trade, was based in Edinburgh. And, you know, the Cataran were an amazing band from Inverness who moved to the Scottish capital, one of the first bands I ever reviewed for my fanzine. And I think I might even have been at that gig. I'll have to go and check through my tickets. But Wilkie House still exists as a venue today. It's a giant converted church and down in Edinburgh's Cowgate, and you know, a fine place for clubs and for live music over the years. I mean, do you remember the feeling you got from doing that first show? I mean, did you feel that you got a bug to do more, or was that a gradual thing, Lisa?
No, I think it was a great feeling. I mean, it was a great feeling because it was for such a good cause as well. You know, so that was fantastic. I mean, I think everyone who works in music, certainly when they start out, and actually even to this day, you're like, oh my God, is it going to sell in tickets? Like, is it going to work? So it was a really good feeling, and it stood me in really good stead, gave me a lot of confidence to carry on. And as I say, yeah, absolutely, a lot more came after that.
Now, I believe we've managed to retrieve your student vote Whytock. We couldn't actually fit the whole thing in, but there was some letters over the top. But this is the main bit of it. So I thought it'd be quite nice to show that before we move on to your post-academic career. I mean, you finished at Napier, and what happened next? I mean, did you consider going away, or were you pretty much decided on having a career in politics and music?
No, I kind of straight after that. I was still really involved in student politics, and I became a member of the first of all the Scottish executive of NUS, and then London, actually, NUS London, and I travelled 2 days a week. I spent in London, travelling back up and down from Edinburgh, because I didn't want to live in London at the time. I mean, I'd been asked to do that, but I really didn't. I didn't want to live down there. So I just travelled down there a couple of days a week. And so around about that time, that was really when the poll tax started to kind of kick in. And first of all, we were fighting against the implementation of the poll tax altogether. And then quickly it became apparent that was lost, and that Scotland was effectively being used as a guinea pig by the Thatcher government, bringing in that tax 1 year earlier than the rest of the United Kingdom. And there was so much anger, I mean, so much fury, not just among students, I think amongst the whole of Scotland, right across generations. You know, it had been constantly attacked with the miners' strike, you know, the closing of Ravenscraig, the taking away of the industry in Scotland, and then, you know, the poll tax comes along. So I basically thought, right, that's it, enough's enough. We need to do something about this, and that's really where the journey began. That at that point in 1989 is where the journey really began. And at that point, we spoke to the STUC and various organisations across Scotland, and organised in association with the STUC. The STUC organised a big day of action on the 1st of April, which was an anti-poll tax day, and we proposed that we organise part of that, which was called Rock Against the Poll Tax. And we worked with Regular Music in pulling that together. Regular Music are promoters who were based in Edinburgh and still are to this day. We worked with them pulling that together, and I had the joy of trying to convince like all these Scottish bands to come along and play at this gig, which was against the poll tax, and it was fantastic. We had a Wet Wet Wet, Deacon Blue, Hue and Cry, Texas, a few others were all on the bill in the Usher Hall, and then in Potterrow, in the Student Union in Potterrow, again we had the Cateran and a whole host of local artists performing, and then there was massive kind of like marches and demonstrations right across the country on that day. So my role within that was really pulling together the cultural component of that day of protest. So that was the first big event that we did.
And I mean, it's worth kind of describing the scale of those acts at that particular time. I mean, I think that in today's terms, it'd be probably like having Calvin Harris or Emily Sandé headlining the Usher Hall with with a couple of the other biggest acts from Scotland, Lewis Capaldi on the bill as well. And I think that's interesting, and it's telling in itself that even though these bands were pop bands, they were also really politically engaged in a way that perhaps isn't so much the case these days, or at least not on those kind of issues. I mean, the success of those really then did spur you on, didn't it? I mean, how was it for you? You're fresh out of college, you're working for the National Union of Students, and you're organizing these shows, and then you end up convincing the Scottish Trade Union Congress to organize a huge event, and also to hire you, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I should say though that Rock Against the Poll Tax was very much a people's movement. I mean, it wasn't just me. There were a lot of other people involved in delivering that. And similarly, with the Day for Scotland, which is what came next, Gordon Archer was a person that I worked with, and Lara MacDonald and Martin Coole. There were a lot of people there. But yeah, essentially, what happens after the poll tax was we were like, oh my God, it's still being implemented. Like, that's it. There needs to be something done in support of a demand for a referendum. The referendum that eventually took place and gave us the Scottish government that we now have. And so we decided that organising Scotland's first kind of like large-scale music festival would be a good idea. And we went to talk to the STUC about that, and yeah, that was interesting. It was great.
I mean, what confronted you when you went to your first meeting there?
I mean, Campbell Christie had always been a great, supporter, and I kind of knew him.
Was it the Secretary General?
Yeah. Of the STUC. And him and Bill Spears at the time were both very forward thinking. But anyhow, they got me into this board meeting, like, and I mean, like, I had a Mohican, I had holes in my Doc Marten boots. I mean, I was skint, like I was a student. And I walked into this boardroom, and I kid you not, the boardroom's huge. and it's a very big boardroom table, and sat around that boardroom were, I don't know, 24 men to me who all looked like the same, with like grey hair and suits and like ties on, and just all looking very kind of like General Secretary of Trade Union like, and we basically had to convince them to let us organise a festival in a field in Stirling. And I remember I actually checked this with Mark Mackey the other day. I was talking to him, and I said to Mark, "Did we really have to bring that stage all the way from Belgium?" Because Regular again were working with us as the production partners on the event, and he said, "Yeah, we did." And I said, "Oh my God!" So I remember kind of like being in the STUC boardroom and saying, I mean, I know it means we might have to bring a stage from Belgium because there aren't any stages in Scotland, but it'll be worth it. It'll be really good. There'll be 50,000 people there and it'll be fantastic. And yeah, I'm sure that Campbell Christie and Bill Spears probably did a lot of manoeuvring behind the scenes to let us do that. But yeah, at the age of 23, that was it. I was organising Scotland's first 50,000 capacity festival, which was interesting.
And how did it go?
It was brilliant. It was really good. I mean, it was a first in so many ways. I mean, you know, for a start, the bands didn't charge us anything. Like the fees, no one charged us any money. I remember Marlene Ross, who at the time was Runrig's manager, and I remember her driving out of the backstage in her big kind of like Jag and rolling down the window and saying, "That'll be a £5 you're due me for the fee, Lisa." £5. So yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, it was really good. It was the beginning of a lot of things, I think, for a lot of people that day. Not just politically, but actually within the music industry itself. I think, you know, a lot of people were involved with that event, and a lot of us have gone on to do different things. It was really good, really powerful.
Is it true that's where you met your husband, Craig, as well? Yeah. How did that happen?
Oh God, Olaf, it was the day before like mobile phones or internet or any of that stuff. And the site was so big, like the only way to get around the site, actually pretty much as similarly as it is in a lot of places today, was with BMX bicycles. So I've been cycling this site all day because there were a lot of stages. You know, there were kids stages, there were food stages, there were other there was a theatre stage, a lot of stages at the event. And my radio was constantly going off, and I thought, gee, I just need a 5-minute break. And I went backstage, and there was a truck cab there, and I couldn't see anyone in it. So I thought, brilliant. So I opened up the cab door, and my husband to be at that point was fast asleep, like on the seats of the cab, because he'd been working the gig as well. So he was taking a bit of a break. So yeah, that's how I met him.
Did he move up and let you in?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he didn't realise at that point it was going to be for life, though.
As that, you mentioned the fact that there was, you know, you had to import the stage or bring in a stage from Belgium, and you know, I think these days it might surprise people that, you know, Scotland lacked that kind of infrastructure because of all the festivals that do take place in Scotland today. I mean, can you paint us a picture of what that music industry landscape was actually like on that live music industry? You know, what other things were not really in place in those days? What other things had to be brought in from other places?
Well, I mean, there was a lot that wasn't in place. For example, I mean, to be honest, that day is the reason that I ended up setting up the agency, because even although all the managers of all the artists that played a day for Scotland, which were Runrig, The Shaman, Hue and Cry, Zeke and Blue, various others that performed, the managers by and large were based in Scotland. But actually, to conclude the deal, you had to liaise with agents from London. There were no agents working on any kind of like serious level in Scotland. So that was one of the things I found really upsetting, and I felt that it would be important to try and rectify that balance a bit. So that was a main reason why one of the major reasons why I actually ended up setting up the agency, was so that artists in Scotland, based in Scotland, could have representation from Scotland.
And how did that go? I mean, who were your first clients there? And, how did nowadays you're obviously known for having a predominantly trad roster, but this was really before you kind of start to specialize in that area. What were the acts that you were working with in those early days?
Well, the very first band that we signed to the agency was the Pearl Fishers. They were the very first band, and then we worked with a lot of different artists. So we represented Travis, who in the early days were called Glass Onion. So we worked with them when they were called Glass Onion, and then at the beginning of when they were called Travis, we organised Scottish tours for Goodbye Mr Mackenzie, the Silencers. We worked with Marsha Fresca. We worked with bands called The Light. A whole host of artists that were not really trad or folk based at all.
And how many of you were there in the company? Who was involved in those early days?
We set it up with three of us. So Gordon Archer, who I'd worked with on the Day for Scotland, and also Susan Millichip. A lot of listeners might know Susan Millichip. She's a very well known and very well respected event manager. Now working at the top of her game actually in the UK. But Susan then was we shared flats together in Edinburgh, and she had been travelling in India, and I just happened to be at my mum's house. Remember, no mobile phones, so I happened to be at my mum's house. Susan had the telephone number and phoned for a chat, and I said, "Hey, do you fancy coming through to Edinburgh, to Glasgow, and starting up an agency?" And she said, "Why not?" So there were three of us at the beginning, and then Gordon left. He decided it wasn't really for him, and Andrew Hunter, who had worked actually previously with Regular, came and worked with us for a couple of years.
And what kind of gigs were you booking for these artists? I mean, I remember, a UK tour on, I suppose, the pop rock side would in the 80s would take in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dundee, and possibly even Perth. So, the distances between those would be, negligible now. If you're doing a tour, you might play one or maximum two in that regard. I mean, what was it like when you were booking those gigs, and what kind of places were you booking the acts into?
I mean, it was, there was a lot more gigs by the same bands in the same venues in those days, because actually there weren't really any venues. I mean, there were a few, but it was certainly before King Tut's was built in Glasgow, for example, before the Liquid Gyms existed in Edinburgh, before the Lemon Tree existed in Aberdeen. So a lot of the venues that we were using were town halls and village halls, and student unions. A lot of student union gigs. Did an awful lot of work in that sector.
And I mean, how was that? If you're organising town hall gigs, is the dynamic different to working in, I suppose, a commercial venue where you working with, I suppose, more enthusiasts than professional promoters?
It was a bit of both. I mean, ZF were very young, like as an organisation, as promoters. So it was a bit of both. I mean, there were some well-meaning local promoters. A guy called Rob Ellen, who's still around actually. He promoted quite a lot of shows in the Highlands of Scotland. There were some promoters in Greenock who were just independent promoters, and then there were some volunteers in village halls. So a lot more independent, smaller promoters around at the time. I mean, Donald McLeod actually did some shows with Donald when he had the venue in Edinburgh. So in those two, yeah, the venue was there. That was about it in Edinburgh.
And I mean, obviously, you start a business with another woman, and you've mentioned a kind of one or two with Runrig's manager. But was the music scene the same as the music industry in Scotland pretty much the same as your experience with the Trade Union Congress, but without the suits?
Yeah, to some extent it was. Although, I mean, I have to say I feel massively supported by, certainly in the early days and still today, by all of the industry in Scotland. I think I've been very, very lucky that way. I mean, certainly we started it off with the help of Jill Maxwell and Marlene Ross. I mean, Marlene was Run Rig's manager and Jill was Deacon Blues manager. And I think there were those two and Marianne Ramsey and Jill who worked at Regular Music. And that is as many women as I can count. So it's one hand's worth of women that works in the music industry then, and that includes me. So Jill and Marlene were really, really supportive, both of them, and incredibly supportive. But so were Regular and DF. I mean, Stuart Clumpus offered me a job at the very early days of DF. He said, "I want you to come and organise the Scottish kind of component of what I'm about to do," which was DF, and I said no because I felt really strongly that there needed to be international representation of Scottish artists from Scotland, and I really wanted to focus on building that. But he was incredible. I mean, for years afterwards at Tea in the Park, we programmed a stage there, which was the Scottish Music Stage, and Stuart, made sure that happened and made sure that we programmed that for a long time, good number of years. And Pete Irvin was really supportive in unique events as well. Barry from Regular, all really supportive, doing bits and pieces of freelance work, which actually made us some money while I was still trying to build the agency up.
Well, I was going to ask, because how long did it take you to build the agency? Because I know it wasn't an overnight commercial success. And what kept you going in that period? I mean, we can come into the various different event bits of work that you got, but what kind of kept you going in terms of motivation? I mean, I suppose starting with how long did it take you to actually turn a profit with the agency, or for it to start?
It took 10 years. We started off on the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which we were lucky to have then. And in fact, our first office was in a funeral parlour. That was hysterical. Our first office was a funeral parlour. And we got a loan from the Prince's Trust of, I think it was $2,000 or something. And before we managed to get any insurance, the office in the funeral parlour was robbed and we lost everything that we just bought. Our brand new sparkly electric typewriter and all that really high-tech stuff. But, again, really, a lot of people rallied round. People had heard that what had happened, and we were very quickly given office equipment by other music industry organisations who didn't need it, which was really encouraging. But it took 10 years. I mean, 40 quid a week for, a good few couple of years, then 60, then 80, then 100. And then after 10 years, things started to kind of turn around. And I'm very glad to say that I haven't been living on £100 a week for quite a long time now. Although there is always the future right now.
Yes, Back to the Future. Yeah. And have you, in that period, what kept you going? Because I imagine that if you were losing artists to London agencies once they reached a certain level of success, it must have been really exasperating. How did you deal with that, and what kept you going? Were you not tempted just to go, I've had enough of doing an agency, I'll focus on other things?
No, I don't really know what kept me going, apart from believing in the artists that I was representing. At the end of the day, I absolutely believed in the artists. It was really frustrating and it was incredibly annoying. But at the same time, there were a lot of good stories, really fantastic stories. I mean, the one thing that we did decide to do, which was deliberate, was to change course genre-wise in terms of the artists that we were representing. It was before the internet, so it was very hard, to hold on to artists. You were always going to have London kind of knocking on your door. Now with internet, it's much easier. But at that time, it was very difficult. And we came across actually, I got a telephone call from Kenny MacDonald, who at the time was managing the Proclaimers, still is managing the Proclaimers. And he said to me, look, I've got this new artist called Martin Bennett. We'd be interested in you representing him. And Martin Bennett, I don't know if people will remember him, but Martin was absolutely groundbreaking, completely groundbreaking. He was a piper, but which, if people haven't checked out Martin Bennett, go and check him out. It's Martyn Bennett. And he used samples, dance music, club music, traditional instruments. He just fused everything together in a way that he's still groundbreaking. He's still, out there as one of the, I think, most groundbreaking artists of all times, actually. And he was #1 in the World College Music Charts in the States. He played main stage tea in the Park the same year as he played main stage Cambridge Festival. And I think that was something that really excited me, an artist that could cross genres, that could play your folk festivals, but could also play your mainstream festivals. And Martin did that, and we actually represented Martin for his whole life. I mean, sadly, he passed away in his early 30s, a few years ago now. But that kind of reignited a lot of faith in working with artists, and since then we've gone on. We currently we've represented a whole host of people, but currently we represent Elephant Sessions, who are another sort of like left field band that can play mainstream music festivals as well as folk festivals, and there's been a lot of them throughout the years that have done that, and we still continue to work with all of them. So that's been fantastic. And the other thing, Olaf, what really kept me going was when we had a breakthrough with working internationally, when we actually were booking tours for artists on an international basis from Scotland, and we did that, and we still do that to this day. And I think that really kept me going.
So in the meantime, you were also getting bits of work from a range of different promoters. I mean, which I find really interesting, because you've got all these different rival promoters in Scotland, and you get on with all of them, and they're all bringing you in to do work for you. How did you manage that?
They just offered us work. I mean, so as I say, Stuart was great with Tea in the Park. Interestingly, actually, when Tea in the Park first started, Jeff Ellis phoned me in our office and said, "Do you still have the blueprints for the site plans for A Day for Scotland?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Can I have them?" And we said, "Absolutely," because that A Day for Scotland was only ever meant to be for one day, and so. They've probably still got them, actually. I should tell them that the museum in Stirling's looking for them. So DF were really good. Unique Events were great, brought us in, did quite a lot of programming work. Barry from Regular and Unique and UZ asked me to program Aberdeen's Millennium Hogmanay for them. So, yeah, I guess... to be honest, when you are an agent, it's quite important that you do get on with everybody, because that's an agent's job, is to represent artists to the best promoters that are out there. But I just really like them. Just get on with everybody. It's fine.
And you're obviously known for Showcase Scotland, and internationally, that's where that and the visit, which we can come to as well, are where a lot of people from outside Scotland are gonna have met you or connected with you. How did that come about?
So that was quite interesting. Showcase Scotland at Celtic Connections came about because for a couple of years, the then Arts Council, Scottish Arts Council and British Council and Celtic Connections had been trying to organise a little showcase for international delegates, because they understood that naturally people were coming to Celtic Connections to look at artists to programme for their own festivals. So they wanted to consolidate that for the benefit of Scottish artists. So for a couple of years they ran that, but it was predominantly British Council delegates from British Council offices. It wasn't kind of like people with buying power from different festivals or different agencies or venues from around the world. And so Nod Knowles, actually, who was the head of music at the Arts Council, then called me up and said, look, we would like you to formalise this, like take it over, like, and build it into a showcase that actually attracts the commercial music industry internationally. And of course, because my passion had always been building international representation for Scottish-based artists from Scotland, it was kind of a bit of a natural fit, really. And at that point, as I say, we were actually touring quite successfully, our artists around the world. So we had quite a lot of contacts. So yes, we started that I started working at, I think it was in 2001 was the first event that we delivered, and it's grown arms and legs. It's really grown into what is quite a significant event now, and makes a lot of money for Scottish artists. The last sort of economic estimate that we had of the impact was over £3 million in booking fees for Scottish artists. And the important point about that actually is that we only have 180 delegates. It's limited to 180. So from those 180 delegates, they're spending £3 million, and that's just on fees. That's not on the airfares, the merch sales, or any of the rest of it. It's just like fees that the artists are being booked for.
And how's your work, I guess, developed on outside the Showcase Scotland and the agency? I mean, what would you say the past, past 15 years have really focused on? Have you also done any management or done any promotion as well?
We've always still kept our hand in and doing bits and pieces of events because we like doing them. We organised Belhaven Beer's 300th anniversary concert in September of last year. Did a festival in the brewery grounds for them, brought together the old squad, and did that, and that was great fun. It's interesting, actually. It's quite an interesting question, that, because a lot in the folk world and trad world, a lot of the artists actually don't have managers. It's very different in this world. So a lot of them are self-managed. So to be honest, in reality, the work that we do is a lot more than agency. It is live management. That can often be, in addition to the career path work that an agent would normally do to grow an artist, that can often be for us also helping them with licensing deals, distribution deals, appointing the right PR agents, helping them with their marketing campaigns, etc., etc. So yeah, it's a bit more than just straightforward agency work. Not for all of them, but for a good bit of the roster it is.
And I guess perhaps the most famous person you've had on your books was Bob Geldof. Firstly, how did that come about? And secondly, I'm going to have to ask you about your Live 8 experience at Murrayfield Stadium. But let's start with Bob Geldof himself. I mean, how did you end up working with him?
Well, again, ironically, it was through programming. So UZ Events got me to program. I can't actually remember the name of the event. It was I can't remember what it's called. It was in Falkirk. Anyway, they did this festival in Falkirk for a few years, and they asked me to program the main stage.
Oh, big in Falkirk, wasn't it? I think
that was it. Yeah, a gig in Falkirk. Well, big in Falkirk. That was it. Well done, right? So they asked me to program that for a few years for them, and I programmed Bob. And I met his manager of the time, a beautiful guy called Mick, who I really, really liked and got on really well with him. But Mick unfortunately passed away, and he knew he was ill, and apparently he had said to Bob that he felt that I would be the person that should take over from what Mick did. And so I got a telephone call. Actually, I was taking my cat to the vet. It was quite a funny story. I was in the back seat of my car, my husband driving, and our old cat was really sick. And the mobile went, and it was Bob, and he said, "Hi, it's Bob Geldof here." And I said, "Oh, Bob, I need to phone you back. My cat's dying. Can I phone you back?" So that was my first conversation with Bob. But yeah, we went on to work with him for a number of years, which was great. Really good experience. Again, that was live management work. Actually, wasn't straightforward agency work. And yeah, that was really good. Really good.
And that, I guess, led to you ending up on the Live 8 concert, didn't it? I mean, what was the story behind that? I mean, and what was your original role meant to be, and how did that actually develop on the day?
So this was Live 8 in Scotland, and I mean, obviously, my original role was as Bob's live manager and agent. But we also said that we would handle artist liaison. When I say we, myself and actually the Showcase Scotland production team of all women that I had been using for several years. So we were originally going to do the artist liaison, and then to be honest, I don't really know what went on, but I think there was I don't know. It was being managed from London, and we got a call saying, "Look, don't worry about doing the artist liaison. It's fine. The Comic Relief team have offered to do it. It's live TV, blah 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 blah. So they're going to do it." And I said, "Well, look, that's fine, no worries." But you know, I think that my team of 6, I had 6 people, one boy actually, 6 or one man, I should say, 6 people. And I said, I think they still really want to work it. And I'll just come along and quite happily have a wee seat in the guest area and watch the show. So that's what happened. And then it didn't quite work out like that.
So what paint us a picture. I mean, what happened when you turned up thinking you were going to just be watching the show and enjoying the day?
I went along to the artist liaison meeting the night beforehand, and at that, which was supposed to be the briefing, and a few alarm bells started ringing with me when I saw 4 people in the room, and I said to them, where are the rest of your artist liaison team? And they said, oh, they're arriving. They're coming at midday tomorrow. I'm like that. Okay. George Clooney's arriving at 9 o'clock. I think the rest of them are all arriving at 30-minute intervals. What's going to happen? So I went. Actually, it was a lovely atmosphere at that event because everyone in Scotland was kind of cooperating. It was the same time as Tea in the Park, though, so a lot of the crew, production crew, and people were on Tea in the Park, which I'm guessing is why there were production folks from London that came up. But anyway, I found the DF rep and the regular music rep, and I said, I think we have a bit of a problem. There's no artist liaison turning up until midday tomorrow. And so they both, Colin and Barry, said, look, can you run it? And I was like, I've got 6 people, right? That's it. I've got 6 people. And they said, it's okay. So they DF pulled 2 people off Tea in the Park and gave me those 2 people. And there were 8 of us that actually ended up running it on the day.
And I mean, what happened? Did everything? Did folk just rock up and you pick them up from the airport and that was it, or you know?
No, it was there was
protests going on and stuff, and I suppose like possibly even sort of mild riots, mild by other countries' standards. But I mean, how did it pan out?
It was incredible. I mean, it was like, you know, at the end of the day, the Comic Relief team are great, like absolutely fantastic people. Love working with them, but their artist liaison staff were very much used to doing artist liaison for TV, which is completely different. I mean, we were in Murrayfield Stadium, for goodness sake. We had James Brown, and actually we managed to. James Brown, you know, has a reputation for being, or had a reputation for being, quite high maintenance. But we had a great guy working with us called Martin Cool, and I put him on James Brown because his name's Cool. And so they were in the lift in Murrayfield Stadium, and he said, "Hi, I'm James Brown," and Martin said, "Yeah, my name's Mr. Cool," and that was it. Like James Brown was in hysterical laughter, and they were really good friends from that point on. So that was great fun. But yeah, it was difficult. I mean, we had, you know, I had spotters on the stage stage. There was radio protocol wasn't something that I think they were used to on the scale of radio protocol like we would do now. So I had to give up on radios, and me and my team were just working off mobile phones, and we had one person at the stage who was acting as a spotter. I was the only office space they could find for me was a porter cabin with no windows, which was miles away from the stage. So I was relying on someone phoning me like the minute that it was 2 numbers away from the end of the last artist set, so that we could bring the rest of the team to go pick them up and walk them down. So it was definitely a tough day, but yeah, there were riots going off in Edinburgh, and I guess you're going to ask me about the Bob and Bono moment, are you?
Well, yes. Not too Lisa.
So that was, yeah. So that, I mean, we weren't. I mean, for anyone who's watching, you'll know that if you're doing artist liaison, then on this kind of scale, then it's important that you're liaising closely with transport. But transport, I have no idea who was doing the transport on that show at all, actually. I really don't. So we didn't have any information. We were just like, oh my goodness. So basically, I would say that it wasn't any of the Scottish production companies, though. That much I do know. And so I got that kind of kneeling down thing that people do. And one of my team was knelt down at the desk and said, Lisa, you really need to turn around and talk to this person right now. I was like, really? I'm a bit busy. She said, no, you really do. And I turned around, and it was Bono's chief of security. And he said, Bono and Bob are arriving in 15 minutes into Edinburgh Airport, because of course they've been at the G8 summit. And he said, can you organise me a police escort? I'm like, oh my God, I don't believe this, right? It's like, I had no idea that they needed a police escort, or even that they were arriving by helicopter. I had no idea. Anyway, so I was like, oh my goodness. And there literally were riots going off like around Edinburgh. Like there were riots like within a half a mile radius of the arena. You weren't supposed to have any vehicle movement. So luckily, I just happened to have the mobile telephone number of the police person that I needed to contact. So I phoned him and I said, you need to help me. Like, Bob and Bono are arriving in 15 minutes. I need a police escort. You've got to help me. And he said, Lisa, there's riots going off all over Edinburgh. Like, what am I going to do? I'm like, I know, but you need to just get me a police escort. He said, well, I can give you 2 bikes. I'm like, that's great. That'll do. Like, just get me 2 bikes. So he did. God, he really did. So we had 2 bikes that met them, and that was brilliant. They escorted them straight into Murrayfield Stadium. And as Bob got out the car, I was standing there, shook his hand and said, hi, Bob, nice to see you. Have a good gig.
And he was literally on stage a sort of minutes
later.
No,
he wasn't on stage, but he had a lot of interviews and stuff to do. Obviously, as you would expect. So he was pretty much straight into it at that point. So yeah, so it was definitely an experience. But again, like a brilliant experience in team playing, and everyone just kind of like working together, like to overcome what needed to be done to make sure that the gig happened. And it happened faultlessly. Like, I mean, it really did. And that's a lot to do with the team. And not just my team, but the production teams as well.
And I mean, you've obviously gone on to organise a lot of other things. The Showcase Scotland's gone from strength to strength. The visit I find really interesting because it also has a music tourism component, which is an area that really interests me as well. And how did that come about? And can you just give us a little sort of summary of what it actually is?
Yeah, so the Celtic Connections showcase, as you know, as I mentioned that earlier, I've been running it for quite a long time, and it's a fantastic event, but it is one event, and I really felt that there needed to be a strategy, again, bearing in mind that there's still not many agents based in Scotland, bearing in mind that a lot of the artists are self-managed. There needed to be a strategy put in place that could help artists develop internationally beyond Celtic Connections itself. And so a lot of other festivals have been coming to us saying, you know, I'm quite happy to do a focus on Scottish music at the festival. You know, is there anything else that we can do? And it became apparent to me that there wasn't an organisation that could work in a flexible manner all year round to help the export of Scottish artists. So we approached Creative Scotland and established Showcase Scotland Expo 8 years ago now, I think it was. And that's been going from strength to strength. And that's fantastic because it gives us an opportunity to do lots of different things. One of which is the visit that you're talking about, which is a very bespoke, small event that curates an invited audience of music industry from specific territories. So, for example, in 2018, we had the Australian and New Zealand market over, and we had agents, you know, festival organisers, venues, publishers, press agents from that one area, all of whom came to Scotland over 5 days, and they see 21 artists showcasing, but they also get taken to Scone Palace in Perth. They go on whisky distillery trips, beautiful drives around the countryside, and everyone is expected to work with at least 2 artists. We'll cover their flights and their accommodation. They pay a registration fee, but they have to agree to work with at least 2 artists in return for that trip. And to be honest, I've never really worried about that, because the quality of the artists in this particular genre in Scotland, you know, is certainly amongst, if not the highest level in the world. Our artists are coming from Scotland in this genre of music, so I'm never really worried about saying they have to work with 2 artists, and of course they do. And in fact, from that version of the visit in 2018, 7 artists got signed by agency deals out of the 21 bands that showcased, and then a whole year of Scotland across Australia was launched. Unfortunately, it's due to be this year. Having said that, the majority of it went ahead because the Australian summer, of course, is January through to the end of March. And we had like over 350 individual concerts of Scottish artists right across Australia in 2020. So there's a lot of really good outcomes that come from that. And that's funded to this day. It's funded by Creative Scotland, and the visit is also supported by the PRS Foundation as well. So yeah, that's the other wee bit of what we do.
So obviously you were, you know, as an agent and someone who, and as an event organizer, you know, you couldn't be in, and with an element of tourism as well there. I mean, you couldn't be in 3 worse sectors at the moment. What have you been doing in that over the past few months to, I guess, to fill your time after you've rescheduled tours for your artists? I mean, I believe you've started a new music export initiative and worldwide, and there's also the postcards from Scotland. I mean, we've got about 2 minutes left, but it'd be great if you could just kind of try and sum that up, and we can point people towards it on social media afterwards.
So we've been really lucky. Creative Scotland have let us pivot our funding, and we've been working with global export offices around the world on Global Music Match, which is 14 export organisations teaming up to introduce artists through social media. That's coming soon. And Postcards from Scotland are 18 Scottish artists who are being presented in a 90-minute film, which is being hosted digitally by 10 of the largest folk music festivals across the world, including the Philadelphia Folk Festival in the US, Cambridge Folk Festival, Rudolstadt, Germany, Tuner, Denmark, Lorient, France, Borneo, on it goes, and they're all presenting those artists on their platforms. So it's our role to keep artists engaged and their profile high at this time. I personally, I think it's just as important, if not more important than ever.
And what what are your plans over the next 6 months? I mean, if venues have to stay closed longer, I mean, are are you going to be focusing your efforts into that kind of promotion of Scottish talent abroad through these different means? Are there any other things you have in the pipeline?
Yeah, I think we're looking at doing the visit digitally again. That'll be happening in September and again in November. And in terms of the artists, we are looking at. I mean, it's going to be very hard to do live gigs while social distancing is still in place and make them break even. But we're definitely looking at rescheduling everything for the artists and taking some of that online for some of the roster.
Well, I look forward to seeing what happens with that, and come and join us for our Reimagining Music Expo session tomorrow, because that'll be covering a lot of those topics, and it'd be nice to have you in our virtual room for that, Lisa. Thanks very much for joining us. It's a wonderful start to Wide Days. For anyone who's not got a ticket for the event, it starts in earnest tomorrow morning with 2 hours of one-to-one meetings, networking, afternoon of panels, and then 3 showcase acts in the evening. And after that, we'll also have a light-hearted session when our American friends in different time zones are able to join us. And that'll be 10 Things I Hate About You. We've got artists versus managers, each noting down their posts, their pet hates about the others, all in a spirit of mutual understanding and reconciliation, of course. Friday will also be a morning of networking and meetings, Friday including something with the Edinburgh Jazz and Blues Festival roundtable. In the afternoon, we've got another great range of panels and presentations and discussions, more showcases in the evening, and then please join me on my guided tour early on Saturday afternoon, followed by our Wide Whiskey Club. Anyone's free to join in with that. You don't have to be a whiskey expert. We provide those so you can ask any whiskey related questions, and then come and join us on Saturday evening for our festival takeover, which comes courtesy of the Focus Wales event, which would have taken place in May, which is a selection of great emerging Welsh talent, and then some amazing electronic jazz programmed by the Edinburgh Jazz and Blues Festival. So join us after this for our Q&A with Lisa. Come and hang out. If you've got some questions about Wide Days and what lies ahead, we'll also be on hand to answer those questions. So thanks very much for joining us, and see you shortly.